Okay, so this is my little unboxing, kind of first impressions, first thoughts, and short review of this piece of hardware. This is the 8BitDo SN30 2.4G gamepad, if you can see that. So while this is not really a gaming focused channel, we love gaming here at Second Tech. I've been playing games my whole life. I think video games are what first got me interested in information systems and technology, and that's led to a very fruitful career and a very happy hobbyist as well. So yeah, I want to take just a couple minutes to talk about this piece of hardware, why I got it, what it is, and why you might want it too. So if you're like me and you grew up in the United States, you're born in the, let's say, mid to late 1980s, maybe even early 90s, chances are you played the Super Nintendo. And I don't have, unfortunately, an original Super Nintendo with me anymore. One of my regrets selling that a long time ago. But I have here the SNES Classic, which is a pretty cool little faithful mini recreation of that system. And that system, of course, was released by Nintendo here in North America circa 1991. And it was a 16-bit system, right? It had a 16-bit CPU. Excellent graphics, excellent sound for the time, at least for a home console. And yeah, for many of us, I think, again, if you're growing up here in North America and you're growing up in the early 90s, chances are when someone even mentions the phrase 16-bit, this is the system that comes to mind. This piece of hardware. Not the Amiga computers, not the Atari ST, maybe the Genesis, if you're one of those Sega kids. Really not the TurboGrafx 16. This is what comes to mind when someone mentions the word 16-bit. Right? The look, the feel, the sound of 16-bit, like this is it for many of us. I know not all of us, but for many of us my age. And so when Nintendo re-released this console in this mini version here, there's a lot of hype around it because this guy, the Nintendo Classic, which is a recreation of their earlier console, sold out very quickly. People loved it. People want to get their hands on it, and they just couldn't. I was fortunate to get a hold of a few. And so these systems are excellent if you grew up in that era. I don't mean, maybe you have one. I don't need to tell you this, but they're excellent systems. Let's actually take a closer look at the controller itself. This is called the 8BitDo SN30 2.4G gamepad. Now, I want to tell you just a little bit why I picked this model up, what problem it was solving for me. So, like I just told you before, right, we love these classic Nintendo consoles that they released. Really is a kind of a nostalgic thing for a generation, but also a simple way to enjoy games. I've been enjoying these with my young children recently, right? No hassle, very simple games. No one's harassing you via voice chat or saying profane things. You don't have to deal with accounts and locking down accounts. What can they download? What can't they download? Just all that stuff. It harkens back to a simpler time when you plugged the console in, you popped in a game, and there you went. No firmware, no day one updates to even make the game playable, just play. So the problem that this was solving for me specifically was that as excellent as the classic consoles that Nintendo released were, they had one glaring issue in my mind, and that was the fact that the controllers are wired. Now, the controller itself is excellent. As you can see, it's an incredibly faithful recreation of the original Super Nintendo controller. I mean, I don't have one of the original ones anymore, but I can tell you I played that system a lot as a kid, and it is indistinguishable. The feel, the plastic, the buttons, the weight is a little bit lighter, I think, because there's less electronics in here and you can feel that. But yeah, it really, in terms of use and feel and retro experience, it's excellent. But they went with this wired controller. Now, is that part of the retro experience? Sure. If you grew up playing games in the early 90s, you know that getting your cable snagged in the middle of playing a game was just normal. It was part of life. Your mom, your brother, your sister, your friend, your cousin, your dog, your cat. It happened. You're in the middle of a game, you're about to beat that boss and snag, and there goes the inputs. Sometimes the games would even freeze. You would die, you hadn't saved, or maybe there was no saving, and you were just totally screwed. So I get it. It's part of the retro experience. It's part of the feel. But, I mean, yeah, when you have young children like I do, and they're constantly snagging stuff, and you don't want to break these classic consoles again because they're becoming collector's items at this point. And I kind of want to take care of them, but at the same time still use them. This controller just had that glaring weakness of being wired. So that's where the 8BitDo SN30 2.4G comes in. Now, you need to be careful because there's actually two different models of this very controller. They look identical, but they have a difference in the name. So this is 2.4G, which means it's specifically designed for 2.4 gigahertz wireless connections with these classic consoles, okay? There's another edition of this controller that is meant specifically for Bluetooth. So this controller will not work wirelessly without some special adapters with your Windows PC or your MacBook or your Android phone or your Linux box. It just won't. It wasn't designed for that, and I'll show you why in a minute. But interestingly enough, it actually can work wired with those systems. So it can work wired with pretty much anything on the planet: Windows, Mac OS, Linux, Android even, with some adapters. But it will only work wirelessly, again, without some very special adapters with these classic consoles. Okay? But yeah, so let's open this up and let's take a closer look. I've already opened up one of these, but we're going to open up the second one here. I've not opened this quite yet. Packaging's okay. It's not the best thing in the world, but not the worst thing in the world either. I've seen a lot worse. If you buy cheap stuff on Amazon like I do all the time, you know just how insanely crappy the packaging can be on some electronics that you spend your money on, and it's kind of scary. You wonder if it's going to work or not. But you know, while it's not the best thing I've ever felt, it does feel good. It feels premium, and I think it's protecting the device just fine. Let's go ahead and reach in here, see what we got. There we go. Let's put this to the side. Okay, so here it is. Really simple, but efficient. It's in there nice and snug, right? Things didn't move around while it got shipped here, so it looks like it's in good shape. Here's the controller itself. Again, this is the specific 8BitDo SN30 2.4G model, designed for the SNES and NES Classic. I can tell you, I mean, again, I've been using another one that we bought for a while now, but this controller just feels so good, so authentic. Let me bring back the first party controller just so you can see them side by side here. You can see that. Look at that. Exact same profile. Same color scheme. The colors aren't arranged in exactly the same way, as you can tell. But I'm telling you, they did really well. It looks the part. Interestingly enough, they went with kind of this darker gray color on the face of the controller versus the lighter gray on the first part controller. And you'll notice the start and select buttons are completely horizontal versus diagonal here on the original controller. And I think maybe one reason they did that is just to avoid any troubles with the legal team at Nintendo. You may know that Nintendo is infamous even, for fighting for their IP, even if it's 30 years old. So they wanted to make sure no one would really confuse this with a true Super Nintendo first party controller. But I can tell you, it looks the part, it feels the part. The D-pad is a little bit harder plastic, not quite as rubbery as the first party controller, but still excellent. Snappy, tight. You can tell it's gonna last. Excellent. The start and select buttons are rubbery, just like the authentic first party controller. And the buttons, they even, just, you know, attention to detail here. You have the Vex and the concave buttons, just like the first party controller. They could have skipped on this, right? But they didn't, so you get that authentic feel, and it just feels so right? You have the convex buttons and the concave buttons, and they feel just like the first party controller. That is the attention to detail they put into this. The shoulder buttons are the same size, they have that same curvature. Here on the end, they feel excellent, sharp, precise, not mushy at all, just like the first party authentic controller. They did such a good job. Even the profile, how it kind of tapers down like a keyboard as you go down the controller, it feels exactly the same. Again, I haven't measured it scientifically, so I can't tell you with certainty that it, to the angle and to the millimeter it's exact, but it feels that way. It's a little bit lighter than I think the authentic controller. By authentic, I mean the original SNES controllers, because it has less electronics in it, right? We've gotten a lot better at miniaturizing our electronics, and so it feels a little bit lighter than that, if I remember right. But funny enough, being wireless, you don't have that weight of the cord pulling down, so it kind of evens out maybe. I want to see the back there, what it says. I don't know if you guys can see that or not. But yeah, so it feels the part, it looks the part, but what about functionality? What's new? Again, the big part about this was it is wireless. And that is really the main benefit here over, let's see if we can get this adapter out, over the first party controller, and why I bought it to solve my problems. It has this really neat adapter. Even looks retro, right? It has like that plastic knurling like you would find on old NES and SNES games and cartridges and accessories, if you remember those. Again, it's incredible attention to detail. They didn't have to do that, but they did. It just adds those nice little touches. You can tell they cared. You have a little red LED right there, so you know if the controller is pairing or not. And then, of course, you have the very unusual connector there, but it may look familiar. That is actually the same connector that you would find on a Nintendo Wii Wiimote, funny enough. Nintendo, for some reason, chose to use that same connector type on both the SNES Classic and the Nintendo Classic. So again, we come back to that point where we talked about wireless for this controller really only working with these classic consoles. It'll actually, funny enough, work with a Wiimote as well. Maybe you have an old Nintendo Wii laying around and you like to play virtual console games or something, it'll work there as well. But so yeah, this is why it was designed for the classic consoles. This is why wirelessly it really will only work with the classic consoles. But nevertheless, it plugs right in. So here, I'll show you. So here's the SNES Classic. Plugs in just like that. You can have two of them. They fit side by side just fine. And you can actually roll it right onto your NES Classic as well. And you can just plug it right in there, and there you go. It also fits side by side. I know it's a little bit of a tighter connection there, a little bit less free space, but yes, I have tested it. We can get two in there, and it works great. And yes, you're not using all the buttons, but it still works with NES Classic, and it works just fine. Okay, so again, that's the main reason you purchase this controller, but as you'll see here, the packaging also includes, we'll come back to this paper in a second, a micro USB, which is the connector for the controller end, to USB type A cable of decent length, not great. Maybe it's 3 feet. If you're into Imperial, like I am, I don't know what that is in meters, you have to forgive me. But yeah, so what's cool is it makes it really easy to connect it here. Plug that in. You can plug this in even to a very low powered USB port, type A port on your laptop, your desktop, or just any generic wall brick, and it'll charge just fine. 180 milliamp battery in here, not large, but still, surprisingly, it lasts hours. I've never gone through a play session where we've had to recharge it. It's been that good, even for the size of the battery, and it charges pretty quickly through this, surprisingly, again, even through a low power USB Type A port like you would find on, your laptop, not even a wall brick. So excellent. But the other cool feature here is that this turns it into a wired controller that will actually work on devices other than the classic consoles. So believe it or not only does this work wirelessly with the classic consoles you bought it for, 8BitDo decided to go the extra mile and make sure that through USB you can actually use it on other operating systems. You can use it on Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and Android. iOS too? No, actually I don't believe iOS because of restriction with USB drivers. But Android, Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. And you just plug it in. You might have to install a driver or two, but you can get it to work. And now you have a controller that not only works with your classic consoles, but works with your favorite emulators and your favorite games on your Windows, Mac OS, or Linux PC. So incredibly versatile. They didn't have to do that, but they did. Now, coming back to the piece of paper here, what's neat about this, if you're like me, you deal with electronics all the time, you're in the industry, this is just a waste of paper, usually, these things. It's some mumbo jumbo warranty information you didn't need to know, 1 year, blah, 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 in multiple languages, and you just toss it out. Well, you don't want to toss out this one. Why? It actually has some really neat and useful information about your controller, about different settings for your controller. So I don't know if you can see that here, but it actually tells you, it reminds you can do it wirelessly with your NES, SNES, or Super Famicom Classic editions, and you can plug it in via USB to your PC. And it actually gives you instructions on how to change the input setting between X input and D input on your PC. Now, that's important if you play any sort of emulators or you play PC games. With controllers, some games support X input, some games support D input. This actually tells you how to program this controller to work either in D input mode or X input mode. Again, versatility. Yes, it works with your Classic Edition consoles, but it also will work with your Windows, Mac OS, and Linux PC, and again, do so in multiple modes. So very neat. All right, so we've talked about the controller a lot. What are my final thoughts here? Oh, tight connection, getting really long. If you're into retro gaming, if you've been looking for a quality third-party wireless controller for your classic console, you cannot miss on this one. I've used a lot of other cheaper controllers out there, third-party ones for these consoles and for your PC and other things. And I can tell you that 8BitDo has just released an incredible example here of attention to detail, authenticity, but also modern function. So again, I'll leave a link down in the description if you want to learn more about this particular gamepad from 8BitDo, as well as a link to their Amazon store. Check it out and let me know your thoughts. If you have any questions, shoot me a message. Okay, thanks.